Hello everyone. Today you will learn about the most dangerous gangs in Russia. This criminal organization had a distinct signature which involved dismembering the bodies of uncooperative businessmen and burying competitors alive. We're talking about the 29 KOMPLEKS gang. The gang emerged in Nizhnekamsk in the Republic of Tatarstan in the mid-80s. It later earned a reputation as one of the most brutal gangs in Russian history. The name was derived from a micro-district. The leader of the gang was Mansur Safin, who rallied his friends around him. The gang stood out for its high level of preparation and discipline. Smoking, alcohol, or drug use could easily cost someone their life. The associates shared a common goal. They wanted to seize power in the city. And in their understanding, all means were justified. Naturally, law enforcement agencies could not ignore the street violence, and soon Safin found himself behind bars. The new leader of the gang was Adigan Salahov, nicknamed Oleg Bolshoy, a seasoned criminal feared even by his own henchmen. He got rid of Safin, who had returned from prison, by shooting him with a machine gun in his own under-construction cottage. The gang made money through extortion. They collected protection money from businessmen and quickly gained control over a large part of Nizhnekamsk's enterprises, extending their influence far beyond its borders. The gang's influence even reached KAMAZ, a major truck manufacturer. Their monthly income exceeded hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was during this period that the 29 KOMPLEKS gang gained a reputation for their brutality. The gang even had a special burial brigade within its ranks, responsible for disposing of the victims' bodies and covering up the evidence at the crime scenes. In 2004, 33 members of the gang, including Salahov, were caught, convicted, and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Next on the list is the TAMBOVSKAYA OPG, one of the most powerful criminal organizations in St. Petersburg during the 1990s and early 2000s. The name of the gang was derived from the birthplace of its founders, Vladimir Komarin and Valery Lidovskych. They met in St. Petersburg, but both were originally from the Tambov region. Before embarking on a criminal career, Komarin worked part-time in cafes in Leningrad, first as a waiter and later as a bouncer. However, he quickly grew tired of that line of work and began considering something more serious. It was then that he and Lidovskych decided to create their own criminal group. Initially, they only accepted locals into the gang, but after the coverage by Alexander Nevzorov, where he talked about the terrible Tambovites, the number of people eager to join the Tambov OPG started to grow. And now the place of origin was not that important anymore, as the new members included former military personnel, athletes from combat sports, and even State Duma deputy Vyacheslav Shevchenko. The criminals were involved in importing office equipment, exporting timber, and the gambling business. In the mid-90s, the gang controlled one-third of the Russian drug trafficking through the port of St. Petersburg, and with the help of the deputy, they managed to legalize and monopolize the entire fuel and energy business in the city for several years. The power of the Tambov gang was so significant that their leader was nicknamed the Night Governor of St. Petersburg. And during the turbulent 90s, the gang became known for a long list of high-profile cases, from attempting to obtain a submarine for Colombian drug barons to the assassination of politician Galina Starovoitova, who was shot in 1998 at the door of her own apartment. During his criminal activities, Komarin purchased an apartment worth $5 million. In total, he had assets of approximately $2 billion, equivalent to about $3.5 billion today. Komarin was arrested in 2007, initially for 2 raid seizures in St. Petersburg, and he and other members of the gang were sentenced to 15 years in prison. However, when new details about the activities of the gang emerged later, their sentences were increased to 24 years of strict regime imprisonment. The OREKHOVSKAYA OPG was one of the most dangerous criminal groups in Moscow during the 1990s. The Orekhova group derived its name from the Orekhovo-Borisova district of Moscow, where most of its members resided. It all started with a simple tractor driver named Klin Timofeyev, who completed his military service in the late 1970s and moved to Moscow. He was passionate about sports and dreamed of becoming a famous athlete. In Moscow, he started working as a karate instructor. However, his expectations were not met. His sports career did not take off, his salary was low, and on top of that, in 1981, karate was officially banned by authorities. After getting married and having a child, Timofeyev's financial situation worsened. Of course, he worked as a taxi driver in his spare time, but as he put it, "Well, I tried to make money driving a car. I worked all evening and earned 31 rubles. and I was tired like a dog, and in a day at the street market I could earn 100 times more. This seemingly innocent activity brought in serious profits. However, you get used to the good life quickly, so it soon became not enough. The simple tractor driver from a village in Novgorod gradually began to take control of scattered gangs in southern Moscow. By 1988, Timofeyev had gained authority and the nickname Sylvester, and he had a couple of dozen tough guys at his disposal. Many members of the group were former athletes just like him, broke and without any prospects in professional sports. Gradually, the influence of the group spread throughout Moscow and then across Russia. The activities of the OPG included robberies of long-haul truck drivers, car theft, extortion, and financial machinations. The OREKHOVSKAYA gang instilled terror in the residents of the southern district of Moscow with their audacious actions and particular cruelty. They extorted money from gas stations, shops, and numerous small business owners. Bloody clashes with rivals and contract killings were commonplace for them. One of the most high-profile murders by the OREKHOVSKAYA OPG was the killing of Georgian criminal leader, politician, businessman, and founder of the Sportsmenu Rossii party, Otar Kvartishvili. Like most criminal authorities, Timofeyev met his end before the authorities could reach him. The leader of the criminal alliance was killed when a remote-controlled bomb was planted in his car. Sukonnaya Sloboda, or Sukonka. It was named after the Sukonnaya Sloboda microdistrict near the center of Kazan. The group is still active and is considered one of the oldest in Russia. Rumor has it that it dates back to almost Tsarist times. The gang also has its own code designation, 797, which is deciphered as Sukonka, the Valley of Death. In the 1990s, the leader of the OPG was a thief-in-law named Marshan Yakupov, nicknamed Marsik. Under the leadership of the leader, the gang was involved in almost all types of criminal business, but mainly specialized in extortion of retail trade. Around the same time, a certain set of rules for Sukonka members was formed. One of the rules stated that members of the group were allowed to work, but it was strictly forbidden to serve others, such as working as a waiter or a car washer. Strict discipline reigned within the OPG. Members were required to participate in joint sports training and martial arts classes 3 times a week. Additionally, each gang member was required to contribute a fixed amount of money to the common fund every month, which was usually used to support incarcerated comrades to pay for lawyers for those under investigation. In 2006, the leader of Sukonka was caught in a fraud case and sentenced to 7.5 years of imprisonment. However, 6 years later, the criminal died of a heart attack. Despite all this, the OPG did not cease to exist. Currently, the law enforcement unit is taking all necessary measures to dismantle the Sukonka formation. Slonovskaya OPG is the largest and most well-known criminal group in Ryazan, with its activities extending far beyond the region. The group appeared in 1991, with its leaders being Deputy City Prosecutor Nikolai Ivanovich Maximov, nicknamed Max, and taxi driver Vyacheslav Yevgenievich Yermolov, known as Slon. It all started when Nikolai Maximov became dissatisfied with his previous life and realized that there was no better way to quickly enrich oneself than to break the law. However, carrying out illegal operations alone was difficult and risky. Nevertheless, fate brought Maximov together with local taxi driver Yermolov. He was not known for his honesty and integrity. He often overcharged fares, taking advantage of the fact that passengers didn't dare argue with a grim 2-meter-tall man. Together, Maximov and Yermolov decided to break into the criminal world. Initially, they were involved in extorting protection money from local gamblers. That's how the criminals amassed their first capital. In parallel, through acquaintances, they sought out strong young men, whom they then trained in basement gyms. There were many who wanted to join the ranks of the elephants. Orphan teenagers who romanticized the criminal world and were willing to risk their lives on the boss's orders were particularly eager. Soon the criminals mastered the schemes of car sales and extortion. The scheme was simple. The gangsters posed as buyers or sellers, took advance payments for cars or money, and then disappeared. The deceived citizens attempted to find the fraudsters. If they succeeded, such encounters ended with brutal beatings. By the late 1990s, the elephants practically controlled Ryazan. They showed interest in financial pyramids, organized contract killings, and kept the entire city in wild fear for several years. They were so well known and popular that it was prestigious among Ryazan girls to marry an elephant. In 1996, the Slonovskaya OPG was liquidated. The most influential members of the gang were convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The leader of the gang, a taxi driver who terrorized the whole of Ryazan, fled to Europe with his ill-gotten gains. Hadi Taktash, a land of wonders. Step into the train and there it disappears. That's what the residents of Kazan said about the OPG. The gang appeared in 1982, initiated by young repeat offenders. The leadership was taken over by Kazan thief-in-law Rauf Sharafuddinov. The main task of the criminals was to control the entrusted territory, but everything changed after Radi Galiakberov, nicknamed Raja, was released from prison. He believed that times had changed and that decisive action was needed. In order to significantly increase profits, Raja proposed expanding the OPG spheres of influence, engaging in extortion and establishing the supply of illegal substances. The idea did not sit well with the existing leader of the formation, and soon a war broke out. It did not end in favor of the authority. After that, Raja became the full-fledged leader of Hadi Taktash and began implementing his plans. Under his leadership, the gang held Kazan in fear until 1999. The criminals supervised over 40 companies and controlled Kazan's prostitutes. The city's health combine was transformed by enterprising Taktashevs into a center for the sale of love for money and drug trafficking. In addition, several major underground brothels operated in the city, each of which brought Hadi Taktash members up to $6,000 per day. The leader of the gang, Radi Galiakberov, often carried $1 million in cash in his car and enjoyed showing off the money to the public. Even in cemeteries, nothing happened without the knowledge of local mafia. Perhaps that's why their favorite tactic of dealing with competitors and other enemies was appointing a shooter right at the cemetery, so as not to waste time getting rid of evidence. In 1999, the police caught one of the Hadi gang's hitmen. While in custody, he gave up Raja, and soon the gang leader was apprehended. In 2002, he was sentenced to life imprisonment and sent to the Black Dolphin prison. Another equally ruthless gang was the Tver Wolves. It was a relatively small criminal group, with no more than 10 members, but that didn't stop them from gaining control over cargo transportation and gas stations on the Moscow-St. Petersburg highway, as well as the gambling business, construction and logging companies, and alcohol producers. The leader of the group was Alexander Kostenko, nicknamed Lom, Crowbar. He earned that nickname from his former job, as he used to handle the acceptance of scrap precious metals. In 1984, Kostenko received a 7-year prison sentence for theft, dealing in stolen goods, and illegal possession of weapons. In prison, he met Anatoly Osipov, nicknamed Volk, Wolf. When Kostenko was released in the early 90s and formed the OPG, he appointed Volk as the head of the gang's combat sector. Osipov himself was a peculiar person. He often claimed that the killers under his command were the sanitizers of the forest and superhumans. He ordered everyone joining their gang to have a tattoo in the form of a wolf's head. Later, a tattoo of Akela from the animated film The Jungle Book was found on the body of one of the criminals. The Tver Wolves were involved in extortion, car theft, and collected tribute from prostitutes on the Moscow-St. Petersburg highway. In the late 90s, they also added contract killings to their list of crimes. The Wolves became notorious for turning executions of their rivals into brutal spectacles. They publicly shot their victims at close range, sometimes using both hands. That's why the Tver OPG went down in history as one of the most bloodthirsty. The gang's most notorious crime was the murder of Mikhail Kruk on July 1, 2002. Initially, the plan was just to steal something from the singer's house and thereby force him to seek help from Lom. Kruk would then become indebted and be forced to give him a portion of his concert fees. However, the singer returned home early and caught the robbers. Former warrant officer Dmitry Vesolov fatally wounded Kruk and soon paid for it with his own life, because the singer was a friend and idol of Volk's son, and Osipov Jr. personally dealt with Vesolov. The gang disbanded after the murder of Lom in 2006. The leader's car was riddled with bullets from automatic weapons. The remaining members of the OPG were sentenced to life imprisonment. And finally, the Volga OPG. The Volga criminal group was created by two natives of the city of Tolyatti, Alexander Maslov and Vladimir Karapetyan, who worked at the Volga Hotel. The gang was mainly involved in selling stolen parts from the local automobile plant VAZ. Initially, the criminals extorted protection money from companies dealing in Zhiguli cars, but soon dozens of enterprises and dealership companies came under the control of the group. During this period, the Volga Group earned over $400 million per year. In the mid-80s, the OPG controlled the entire shadow economy of Tolyatti. Underground businessmen, of whom there were many in the city, paid monthly tribute to Maslov. However, Alexander was soon convicted of a murder committed during one of the clashes with competitors. In 1992, he was shot immediately after his release. After Maslov's death, Dmitry Ruzlaev, known as Dima Bolshoi, took over the leadership of the group. He managed to remain the leader of the gang for 6 years. In 1998, like his predecessor, he was killed. Before the final disintegration of the gang, the last leader Yevgeny Sovkov decided to seek revenge against the main enemies. During this period, Tolyatti witnessed a series of high-profile killings. The director of Lada TV, Sergei Ivanov, the director of a fish processing plant, Oksana Lobintseva, and other prominent figures of the city were among those killed. By the early 2000s, the group was eliminated. Most of the leaders and hitmen were killed, and the remaining members received life sentences from the Samara Regional Court. As you can see, each villain awaits their own punishment. Some are taught by the law, while others are punished by fate. Of course, there will always be criminals and those seeking easy money, but we should not forget that our environment depends on each and every one of us. Together, we can make the world a better and safer place. That's all from us. Wishing you all a good mood, and until we meet again.